The topic for today comes from another listener suggestion from Jackie, who recently asked if I had ever done an episode on praying mantises, which I haven't, despite the fact that they rank very high on my list of favorite insects, probably in the number 3 spot behind cicadas and the dragon and damselflies. So, feral friends and fellow nature nerds, that's what we're talking about today, praying mantises. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. Mantises are an order of insects, Mantidae, that includes over 2,400 species. And if you get into the specifics, they're subdivided into about 460 genera and 33 families. The largest family, though, is the Mantidae, the mantids. As you might imagine, with that many species, mantises can be found worldwide in both temperate and tropical habitats. And they're pretty easy to recognize for the most part. They have a triangular head with bulging eyes, which is all supported on a flexible neck. Their elongated bodies may or may not have wings, more on that in a bit, but all the mantids do have forelegs that are greatly enlarged, and not because they never skip leg day, but because they're adapted for catching and gripping prey. But they're not praying mantises, Preying. No, instead their upright position while remaining motionless with their forearms folded resembles somebody kneeling in prayer, and thus has led to the common name praying mantis, Praying. They're often thought to be related to other elongated insects like grasshoppers or stick insects, but they're not. They're actually more closely related to termites and cockroaches. They're also sometimes confused with mantis flies, although in this case it's easy to see why. Mantis flies look very similar. It's the very reason they have mantis in their names. They have similar forelegs, but a less triangular head. They kind of look like somebody took the top half of a praying mantis and glued it to the bottom half of a wasp. But this is a case of convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is the independent evolution of similar features in species with completely different lineages. Basically, convergent evolution results in different species having similar features that have a similar form or function, but these features weren't present in the last common ancestors of those group. The classic example, of course, is the evolution of flight. Flying insects, birds, pterosaurs, and bats all evolved the very useful ability to fly, completely independently. But I digress. Let's take a closer look at the anatomy of a praying mantis, starting with the head. Mantises have large, triangular-shaped heads with 2 large bulbous eyes, 3 simple eyes, a pair of antennae, and a beak-like snout and mandibles. Their head sits on top of a remarkably flexible neck that lets them rotate their heads nearly 180 degrees. Like other arthropods, the mantis's eyes are made of units, each of which are composed of clusters of photoreceptor cells surrounded by support cells and pigment cells. These units are called ommatidia, and the mantis's eyes contains about 10,000 of these units. The location and spacing of the mantis's eyes gives them a wide binocular field of vision. A small area at the front of the eye, called the fovea, has greater visual acuity than the rest of the eye and can produce the high resolution necessary to examine potential prey. The peripheral ommatidia perceive motion, so when a moving object, like say prey, is noticed, the head rotates rapidly to bring the object into the visual field of the fovea. Further movement of the prey is then tracked by corresponding movement of the mantis's head to keep the image centered on the fovea. Each eye also has a dark spot that moves as the mantis rotates its head. It looks like a pupil, but it's not, and it's called a pseudopupil. Rather than being a physical structure of the eye, it's a result of the ommatidia that are viewed head-on absorbing the incident light, while those on the side are reflecting it. Now, moving down the mantis, we have the body, which, as I mentioned earlier, may or may not have wings. Mantises can be loosely categorized as being long winged, short winged, vestigial winged, or apterious or wingless. In many species, males have wings and can fly, while females may be flightless, either because they're wingless or because they're just too big. Those that have wings have two sets of wings, the outer wings and the hind wings. The outer wings, called tegmina, are usually narrow and leathery, and they serve as both camouflage and a shield for the hind wings, which are clearer and more delicate. And then, of course, on the body, we have one of the most distinguishing features of the praying mantis, those two spiked grasping forelegs that are used to catch and hold prey, called raptorial legs. In most insect legs, including the mantis's back four, the two segments of the leg closest to the body are small, and they combine to form an inconspicuous base for the leg. In the raptorial legs, though, those two segments are much longer, almost as long as the femur, which in mantises is the large spiky forearm part of that grasping appendage. Below the femur is the other part of that grasping appendage, the tibia, which also has some tooth-like structures to help grasp prey, along with a small claw. The raptorial legs then end in a delicate tarsus, which is used for walking. So when you put all this together, or at least the vision and the raptorial legs, you have an insect that's a generalist predator. Now, their primary prey are other arthropods, but that said, larger species of mantises will eat smaller members of their own species, as well as small vertebrates like lizards, frogs, fish, and particularly small birds. I've seen some videos of hummingbirds falling prey to large mantises. The majority of mantises are ambush predators that only feed on live prey, and they hunt either by camouflaging themselves and remaining still, waiting for prey to approach, or by stalking prey with slow, stealthy movements. Of course, there are always exceptions. Some species pursue prey more actively, running over dry ground looking for prey much like tiger beetles do. But once their prey is within reach, mantises strike rapidly and grab the prey with those spiked raptorial forelegs. In some species, they can store the prey for later digestion because the foregut extends the whole length of the insect. Now, since their hunting relies so heavily on vision, mantises are primarily active, or at least hunting, during the day. However, they do have good night vision also, and many species fly at night and might be attracted to artificial lights. Males in particular are often more active at night, probably because it helps them locate the less mobile females by detecting their pheromones, and flying at night exposes them to fewer bird predators than diurnal flight would. In temperate climates, the mantis mating season is usually in the fall, but in the tropics they can mate any time of year. In order to mate, the male leaps onto the female's back, clasping her thorax and wing bases with his forelegs. Then he arches his abdomen to deposit and store sperm in a special chamber near the tip of the female's abdomen. This behavior is very purposeful because if there's something else that praying mantises are somewhat famous for, in addition to those raptorial forelegs, it's for the female biting the head off the male during mating and eating him, something known as sexual cannibalism. So let's examine that for a second. Sexual cannibalism is common among mantises in captivity, and it has been observed in natural populations, but in the wild, only about a quarter of male-female encounters result in the male getting eaten by the female. Still, around 90% of mantis species exhibit sexual cannibalism, and while males typically outnumber females at first, their numbers may be fairly equivalent later in the adult stage, probably because the females are selectively eating the smaller males. In one species, it was determined that approximately 83% of males escaped cannibalism after an encounter with a female, but since they'll mate multiple times, the probability of that male getting eaten increases cumulatively. The reason behind sexual cannibalism has been debated. Experiments show that females with poor diets are more likely to engage in sexual cannibalism than those with good diets. It may also depend on if she's just hungry or not. Chinese mantids that were not hungry displayed elaborate courtship behaviors when left undisturbed. The male engaged the female in a courtship dance to change her interest from feeding to mating. And under these circumstances, the female has been known to respond with a defensive display, flashing colored eye spots on the insides of her forelegs. But when sexual cannibalism does happen, the female starts by biting off the male's head, just like they do with regular prey. And if mating has begun at this point, the male's movements will become more vigorous in their delivery of the sperm. So, one hypothesis is that submissive males get a selective advantage in producing offspring. And this hypothesis is supported by a quantifiable increase in the duration of copulation among males that get their heads bitten off. In some cases, both the duration of mating and the chances of fertilization were doubled. But this is contrasted by another study where males were observed approaching hungry females with more caution and then remaining mounted on a hungry female for a longer time. Because it's all about landing the dismount. The act of dismounting after copulation is a dangerous time for the males because that's when the females most frequently cannibalize their mates. An increase in mounting duration appears to show that the males wait for the best time to dismount a hungry female who would then be likely to kill and eat them. And males that actively avoid getting eaten then have the chance to mate with multiple females and increase their chance of producing offspring. That same study also found that a hungry female generally attracted fewer males than those that were well fed. No big surprise there, right? Now, one species where sexual cannibalism hasn't been observed is the Brunner's stick mantis, which lives in the southern United States. The reason why it's never been observed is fascinating. It's because no males of this species have ever been found. The females reproduce via parthenogenesis, where the egg doesn't need to be fertilized in order to develop. The ability to reproduce by parthenogenesis has been recorded in at least 2 other species, although those species usually reproduce sexually, so sexual cannibalism is still a risk for those males. But whether she eats her mate or not, female mantises lay anywhere between 10 and 400 eggs, depending on the species. Eggs are typically deposited in a froth mass produced by glands in the abdomen. This froth hardens, creating a protective capsule, which, together with the egg mass, is called an ootheca. Depending on the species, the ootheca can be attached to a flat surface, wrapped around a plant, or even deposited on the ground. Despite the versatility and durability of these eggs, though, they're often preyed on, especially by several species of parasitoid wasp. In a few species, mostly those that live on the ground or tree bark, the mother will guard the eggs. For example, one tree-dwelling species is well camouflaged with the bark she lives on, and the mother positions herself with her abdomen covering her egg capsule, ambushing passing prey and moving very little until the eggs hatch. In temperate climates, adults don't survive the winter, and the eggs go into diapause, hatching in the spring. On a couple of side notes, Chinese mantises, which are considered invasive in parts of the U.S., are absent from much of the coastal Deep South and Florida, where the winters don't get cold enough to keep their eggs in diapause. Also, once we brought a Christmas tree from a tree farm in Virginia and noticed mantis egg cases on a lot of the trees. Now, luckily, we noticed this before we brought the tree into the house, so we avoided having a bunch of baby mantises running around the house. I imagine other people were probably not as observant and may have had a surprise after their tree had warmed up inside for a few weeks. Now, while mantises are predators, they're also prey for vertebrates like frogs, lizards, bats, and birds, and invertebrates like spiders, large species of hornets, and ants. But they've developed some interesting anti-predator characteristics. Generally, mantises protect themselves by camouflage. Most species are cryptically colored to blend in with leaves or other backgrounds, which helps them not only avoid predation, but also ambush their own prey. The species known as flower mantises are aggressive mimics. They look so much like flowers that they attract prey that come in to collect pollen and nectar. Some species in Africa and Australia are able to turn black after molting toward the end of the dry season, which is when the bushfires tend to occur, and this coloration enables them to blend in with the fire ravaged landscape, something known as fire melanism. Now, mantises, like stick insects, engage in rocking behavior, where they make rhythmic, repetitive side to side movements. It's been suggested that this enhances their camouflage because it mimics vegetation moving in the wind. And while that may be true, this repetitive swaying movement may be more important in helping them discriminate between objects in the foreground and objects in the background by their relative movement, a visual mechanism typical of animals with simpler sight systems. But species that live on uniformly colored surfaces, like bare earth or tree bark, are also flattened to help them reduce shadows that might reveal their presence. When directly threatened, many mantis species stand tall and spread their forelegs, with their wings fanning out wide, making them look bigger and more threatening. Some species enhance this effect with bright colors and patterns on their hind wings and inner surfaces of their front forelegs. Now, these displays are mostly a bluff, but if harassment persists, a mantis might slash with its forelegs, attempt to pinch or bite, and some species produce a hissing sound by expelling air from the abdominal spiracles. When flying at night, at least some mantises are able to detect the echolocation sounds produced by bats. When the frequency starts to increase rapidly, indicating an approaching bat, they stop flying horizontally and begin descending in a spiral towards the safety of the ground. Okay, one last thing about mantises. They are, in many cultures, symbolic. In some, they're considered good luck. In others, they represent courage and fearlessness. And on that note, my fearless feral friends, we come to the end of this episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, here's how you can do that. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month, and with 3 paid months, you get free Dispatches from the Forest merch. Find all the details at patreon.com/dispatches from the forest. You can donate through either PayPal or Venmo using my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. Also, how you can contact me if you have a question, comment, or your own request for a future episode. You can also donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. You're welcome to send a check. Just message me for my mailing address. And of course, there's Dispatches from the Forest merch for sale. Go check out the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/Dispatches from the Forest. Click on products and see all that we have to offer. Finally, you can follow Dispatches from the Forest on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dispatches from the Forest recognizes that the lands where we live, work, and recreate are the traditional homelands of the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho people. We understand that this land holds immense significance for the original stewards, native nations, and peoples of this region. The Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.